in the name of personal injury law.
We often hear about people being injured and having the right to pursue a lawsuit to recover compensation for their injuries. But what does it mean to pursue a personal injury lawsuit? How does the process work? We have attorney Steve Sinas from the Sinas Dramus law firm with us today to help us understand the process of personal injury lawsuits. Hi, Steve. Thank you for being with us.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. As a personal injury lawyer, I love what I do for people. I like to make a difference for people, but I often find there are a lot of misconceptions out there about how personal injury lawsuits work. So I welcome the opportunity to talk about this today.
So let's talk about those misconceptions. What is the biggest misconception that you encounter?
I would say the biggest misconception is people thinking that because they are injured, they definitely have a right to bring a lawsuit and recover money. As I often say, there are no universal rights that we have to bring personal injury cases. Every injury must be examined based on its own unique facts and circumstances to determine what extent the injured person has legal rights to pursue. There are unique rights and rules that apply depending on whether you were injured in an auto accident, whether you're injured in the course of your employment, whether you're injured as a result of a hazardous property condition, whether you're injured as a result of medical malpractice, whether you're injured as a result of the wrongdoing by the government. There are also many instances where people are injured and there simply is no one who can be sued, and there's no way to pursue any legal action for those people. So there's a lot of explaining we have to do as lawyers talking to injured people.
So for those people who do have a case that they can pursue, what kind of misperceptions are you hearing from clients about how the legal system works?
Well, when I talk to people about the fact they may have a case, they often say, does this mean we have to go to court? I have that question on, do we have to go to court? In response to that, I have to typically explain how the process actually works. And that's a lengthy conversation.
Can you give us some highlight points of how the process works?
Yeah. So when you determine that somebody has the legal right to bring a legal action, the question is, well, how best should they pursue that right? And the practical reality is that you first need to assess whether there's insurance coverage that could apply to the person's claim. And that depends on who are the at-fault parties and whether or not they have insurance coverage that could apply to the claim. And this is important because most people don't have the amount of financial assets that are going to be available for the injured person to recover from if they bring a legal action against the individual. The injured person is going to need to pursue recovery through the at-fault party's insurance coverages. So we look into that, and if there is coverage, we then communicate with the insurance companies to talk about whether or not there's any interest in resolving the claims. And that begins this dialogue about what our claims are about, and they'll tell us, what they think. And if there's not, a meeting of the minds about how it can be resolved, then we will consider initiating a lawsuit.
Okay, so can that lawsuit be filed at any time and in any court?
Well, so first of all, the answer to the question about whether it can be filed at any time is that no, it cannot be filed at any time. Any legal action has an applicable statute of limitations, and a statute of limitations is a period of time that you have to file a lawsuit within. And the specific statute of limitations for a given injury case will depend upon what area of law it involves. There can be varying amounts of time. And so there is an amount of time. You have to know what that time is. Assuming you file the lawsuit within that time, you're not going to have a time issue. But the question is, have you filed the lawsuit in the right court? And then there are these technical rules that deal with this concept called venue, which is the choice of court you have to pursue your legal action in. And there are these venue rules that determine which court you file in. Typically, it's the county where the injured person is injured, but there are exceptions to that rule. So there are some issues that go into what court you're actually litigating in.
So by filing a lawsuit, does the injured person have to start showing up in court in person?
Again, it kind of goes back to that question, does this mean we have to go to court? And the answer to the question about whether filing the lawsuit means the person has to all of a sudden show up in court on a regular basis is no. And what's happening is the person has filed a lawsuit in the court. The court has then created a file and an entry on the docket for the case. And then the lawsuit's served upon the at-fault parties. They then bring in their attorneys to answer the complaint. And then the court issues a scheduling order. And that's an order, a very detailed order. And we're going to show it on the screen here for the viewers to get an idea of what these orders involve. And the order shows on the screen here all the aspects that go into what the court wants to set forth for a timeline of how the case is litigated. It includes the need to disclose witnesses by a certain date, the need to disclose other information and documents in support of the claim. It includes motion deadlines. It includes deadlines for the parties to engage in settlement negotiations before actually having a trial. And eventually there's a trial date, which often can be upwards to a year from the date you file the lawsuit. So it's not really until you get to the trial that the person has to start showing up in court on a regular basis. And that process can take quite some time. And most cases settle before trial.
So talking about possibility of settling a case prior to trial, how does that process work?
Well, I don't have a time here to cover all the details of the methods and procedures that the courts use, but there are defined ways in which the courts try to get parties together to look at the facts and circumstances of a case and try to get them to resolve their case without actually having to have a jury trial. So there are various ways this process takes place. And the bottom line is, as I said, most cases settle prior to trial. But if you get past all that and you still can't resolve your case, then the court lets you go ahead and have a trial.
And if the case actually does go to trial, what is the result that can come from that trial?
So the simple objective of a trial is for the jury to render a verdict on the issues. And in a personal injury case, they're rendering a verdict on the liability of the at-fault party and how much money, if at all, the injured person should receive. And so when that verdict is issued, assuming that it's for a certain amount of money to the injured person, the question is, well, does that injured person get that amount of money? And that gets back to the insurance coverage issue. And so there are limits with insurance coverage. So if the verdict is $500,000 and the insurance limits are 100, it could be the case that the person only recovers the insurance limits, and the extra amount could be pursued against the at-fault party's assets if they have them. But if they don't, then there's no ability to recover in a lot of circumstances. So insurance coverage becomes, again, an issue with how much you recover from a verdict. And then, as you know, Lisa, verdicts can be appealed, right?
Right. So yeah, oftentimes it's not the end of the case that if somebody wins a verdict or a judgment with some money damages, that's not the end of the case, because inevitably the insurance company will want to appeal the case. And so I think the point you're trying to make is that appeals are lengthy and uncertain process. They could extend, in my experience, could extend out the delay that injured person is going to have to wait to get paid, pretty much 18 to 24 months. It's a pretty big delay.
Right.
I guess the good news from the plaintiff's perspective is that it's really hard to overturn a jury verdict, but there's still risks involved. And I think that goes back to what you said about the uncertainty of what would happen next.
Right. And the bottom line for viewers, if you ever in need to pursue a personal injury matter, just understand there's a process to understand and to learn. And there's a lot more goes into it than a lot of people think. So there's a lot to talk about.
Right. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
In the Name of Personal Injury Law is brought to you by the Sinas Law Firm.